Hey there, Squirrel Army! Today we're talking about must-have cards for your EDH collection. If you're enjoying the content here, you can join the Squirrel Army by subscribing and turning on the notifications. Alrighty, so we're talking about cards that you must have in your binder, in your box, somewhere floating around, whatever it is, wherever it is that you've got these cards that you will need whenever you go along and decide to build a deck in whatever color or colors that you decide to build in. And this is mostly like the meat and potatoes type cards that, everyone sort of gets into and whatnot, that are just the staples of the format, essentially. These cards that you will almost always need for decks. Now, I'm not going to talk about any of the dual lands and whatnot, because that's kind of a little bit too obvious to a degree. And again, not everyone has the budget to put in the better dual lands like the Shocks. I even consider like fetches to be duals. They're not true duals or whatever, but for most people, they are a dual land because they can search for, two different land types and whatnot, so it can fix your mana as if it was a dual. So I'm not going to talk about those kind of cards because it does depend, but again, I do say that those would be really good to add to your collection, obviously. But hey, the reality is, I think that's a bit different from staple cards that you would talk about. So let's talk about a few cards. We're gonna, like one of the biggest staple cards, and I agree to disagree with this as well, is that Sol Ring. Obviously, it's one of those cards. If you're ever going to build an EDH deck, for the most part, you're probably going to have this card in there, so you might as well stockpile just a handful or so. I usually like to keep a playset of any certain card that I think I will use. Obviously, I don't keep any Sol Rings, but that's me. I know most people play with it, and most people don't think about it beyond, it goes in every deck, so whatever, it's a staple, and I'll put it in, and whatnot. So, hey, it goes in most decks, and hey, that's the way it is, and it's a staple for a reason, and it's a really good card to have a few copies floating about. It's fairly cheap for the most part, but yeah, there is a fair bit of demand out there for it because, hey, a lot of Commander players want a Sol Ring for the decks and whatnot, so it's one of those great cards that you should stockpile just a handful of, just so that you can keep some floating around whenever you decide to go, you know what, I'm going to build my 8th deck or 9th deck or 12th deck or 200th deck or whatever it is. Well, I need another Sol Ring to build that 200th deck or whatever it is that I'm building. So, yeah, I need to find myself a Sol Ring. And if I don't have another one, well, I might be in a bit of trouble. But, hey, that might be a problem with building 200 decks or whatever. But, hey, what can I say? I've probably built over 200 decks, but, yeah, whatnot. But, anyway, you go with the flow and whatnot. Nature's Law, 3 visits. These are basically the same card, essentially, for the most part. So are like Cultivate and Kadama's Reach, but whatever. So yeah, I was just mainly talking about Nature's Law and 3 visits there, but even like Cultivate, Kadama's Reach, I would still say that if you're, just starting out, that's okay to have some of those as well. Farseek, Rampant Growth, those are really good as well. Sakura Tribe Elder, really good as well. Wood Elves is a really great one as well. I know a lot of people suggest Mana Dorks. I'm not a huge fan of Mana Dorks for the most part, or creatures that put extra lands into play even for the most part, unless they do something else as well. I'm kind of low on those cards for the most part. That's just me personally. I know that I'm a bit weird and I don't really conform to a lot of the stuff that everyone else kind of goes, well, this is just a good card for the most part, or whatnot. But that's the way I look at it. And I just look at it, well, late game or whatnot, I always consider everything in the 4 quadrants of magic type thing, not just, oh, it's good early. Yeah, it's good early, but it's not good at any other time, basically. So I just don't consider it to be like worth the time to being invested in or whatnot. But anyway, that's me again. But anyway, back to what we're discussing here. Arcane Signet. That's another really great one that you know goes in every deck pretty much. Even like as I say, disagree with this strongly into green decks and whatnot. Felwar Stone, another really decent one. For the most part, it's probably going to tap for the mana or a mana of a color at least. So you're getting at least colored mana out of it for the most part. And most of the time, when you're facing your opponents and whatnot, they'll probably have the mana, the color of mana that you need. Or at least hopefully they will. So, you will eventually get the right color that you really, really need. But, you might be sitting there for a little while hoping for them to get the right color. But at least you get colored mana out of it. Mindstone, I think, even though it's colorless, I think Mindstone's a really great include. Mindstone just, that early game mana rock that, you can play and get some value out in the early parts of the game. And then later on, when it's no longer relevant, hey, you can sack it, draw a card. Or even if you do draw it late, again, you can sack it, draw a card. Liquid Metal Talk is another really great one, especially if you're in red or in blue. I don't think black has any way to deal with artifacts though. But yeah, red and blue are great for that because both of those can kind of deal with artifacts. So that means they can basically deal with any permanent as an added benefit. So that's really useful in those decks specifically, but it's certainly a very decent mana rock, at least at the minimum anyway. There's a few other ones that are just kind of generic, like Prismatic Lens. All the other signets, Azuria Signet, Boros Signet, Dimir, Rakdos, Izzet, Orzhov. Then you've got all the talismans, Talisman of Conviction, Talisman of Creativity, Talisman of Dominance, Talisman of Hierarchy, Talisman of Indulgence, Talisman of Progress, all of those ones. Then Thought Vessel is probably the next one that I would think of as far as like really good super duper mana rocks that you probably want to think about putting into a deck of any kind. There are some other colorless ones and whatnot that are out there, and whatnot. But and there's some creature based ones and whatnot. There's some other ones like Orb of Dragonkind and things like that. And you've obviously got the diamonds and whatnot as well. You got Milliken and Mannequin and some of those lonesome Mirs and things like that. There's some other ones like that and whatnot, like Hedron Crawler, Guardian Idol and whatnot. But yeah, and like they're not that amazing. Like there's Grim Monolith. That's actually one of those ones that's often associated with power combos. Actually, Fractured Power Stone. That was another one that I nearly forgot about. That's pretty darn decent. And whatnot. So that's pretty useful. There are a few other ones that are like Sword of the Animist. But Sword of the Animist is like the best one, obviously. But Dousing Dagger is actually okay. Actually, this new Sword of Hearth and Home is really good, though that one's obviously a bit more expensive than Sword of the Animist. But still, I still think that that's a really, really useful card that you should look at. So that's all the ramp sort of like generic sort of stuff that I wanted to talk about here in this first part. So yeah, like those are the cards, like some of the staple cards that a lot of people talk about when you're getting into Magic and whatnot, and you're building your collection in EDH. Like I have a very small collection of cards, most of which I play. Like, I don't tend to keep too many cards that I don't play because I don't I don't like to keep too many cards because I always feel like, well, I should be using cards rather than just hoarding cards and whatnot for no real reason. Like, I only keep enough cards to build decks that I probably know I will build. And I keep a few other cards that, are obvious, like includes like Beast Whisperer, etc., and things like that, that are just really good. But again, we'll probably get into more of these sorts of cards into other episodes. But I first wanted to do this little one here and just discuss some of the like mana staples and whatnot that you probably want to include in your deck. Obviously, there's a few more here and there and whatnot that I have talked about, like Yavimaya Dryad, and there's a few other ones like Sploom Bloom Druid. It does depend on what you're doing and whatnot. Harrow and Rolling Regrowth and whatnot. There's a few other ones that are out there, like Sky Shroud Claim. Though I often think that you need to be in a very specific deck to want Sky Shroud Claim. That's just me. And I again think that like decks like Ragged Dragger and decks like that, they want mana dorks. Or if you're in CEDH and you really care about your curve, like being super duper low or super duper slim, then you kind of care about like lowering that curve and having mana dorks and whatnot, or you really want to get out fast and things like that. But for the most part, I just don't think like I like mana dorks that much. I get kind of the ethos and the theory behind them. They're kind of like Green's mana rocks in a sense. Like you kind of don't really care about them. Like if they die type thing. You hope that you got enough value out of those cards to be worth your time, to being like valuable to your overall game plan by the time that you actually start getting more established with more mana sources and whatnot. So that's why you see people cutting like lands for mana dorks and things like that, because they're like, well, I'm still likely to have, a certain amount of lands in my deck, and hey, well, playing this mana dork will be more interesting or more speedy for me or more better for me in a lot of ways than playing a land and whatnot. But to me, like, I don't know, it's just one of those things. I've never gotten into mana dorks. There's some that I kind of have played, but they're mostly because they have some other extra utility. But that's just me, as I sort of say, I'm kind of off the beaten path with like what I play and why I play it. And I understand that some people, well, you have Beast Whisperer and you have this and you have that, so later on it's just a cantrip or whatever, and that's okay to a degree, and it can make extra mana, like, sure, but I'm just never thrilled to draw a mana dork. Even those, like, some people will say, well, you wouldn't be thrilled to draw a land, would you? I mean, like, well, maybe I would be, because, like, like, I can play it this turn, or if I can't, well, I can play it for next turn, or whatever. And at a certain point, like, some decks are like that, where you get that problem of being like, oh, cool, all I'm drawing is lands, but for the most part, that's a very low-end problem, because sometimes you're on the opposite end of being like, wow, I wish I had one more mana, because then I would be able to actually enact something, rather than being able to enact nothing with my 2 lands and 0 extra mana sources. Like, I get that if I drew a mana dork, again, I could play it, but I couldn't tap it for mana that turn. So, unless I have something to give it haste, but then again, that's a whole different story. And whatnot. But again, that is the way that I look at it. I didn't really mean this to be like, why I hate mana dorks discussion, but hey, at the end here or whatever. But hey, it is what it is. But you guys can tell me what you guys think of that as well, and of these staples, some of these cards that you would probably want to run in most of your decks. Write your thoughts down there in those comments below. I'll be sure to respond. But hey, if I don't see you guys down there in those comments, I'll see you in the next one.